What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I wanted to look back at Mega Man 1, one of the oldest games I believe I've covered on this channel. I don't think it's the oldest. We talked about some horror games that I do think are older, but back in 1987, I wasn't alive yet. I'm sorry to some of the people that are older than me, the viewers watching, but hey, this is a classic game. No anniversary or anything. I believe the game is 37 years old. It's not on the anniversary of it coming out, but I've never actually played almost any Mega Man game, and I felt this is a channel dedicated to the past and dedicated to some of the greatest games of the past. And I grew up in like the PS2 and Wii era. I played like the DS and stuff. That was kind of how I grew up into the PS3 and 360. But this is a game that obviously made its impact and is still around to this day, has so many sequels, and influenced a lot of games going forward. A game that's a staple for Capcom, right? Really not necessarily, I think, putting Capcom on the map, but definitely, it's another game up their arsenal that makes them very, very elite. And like I said, and I think I got to be honest here, the only game in the Mega Man franchise that I can remember playing, and it's not even in the franchise, is Mighty Number 9, if you guys remember that gem, which is not actually, that game is bad. That game is very bad. I remember getting so hyped up for when that game was coming out. I remember, I think Podcast Beyond, IGN, Colin Moriarty and them, I remember them talking it up and just getting excited, and the game came out and it was such a disappointment, and it just, nowhere near as good as what I've seen, because I've watched plenty of the Mega Man games be played on YouTube, but I've never actually played it myself, along with many Castlevania games, by the way. I want to give that franchise a look. But okay, Mega Man 1, like I said, back in 1987. One thing that I want to talk about history-wise before we get into the base game is, I was looking this up, right? You see the infamous poster or box cover. Now, not this one. This one behind me, great box cover. I actually think it really shows you what the game is. It shows who Mega Man actually is, shows the villains, all that jazz. Gives you a good kind of vibe, kind of alert. But this was Rockman, right, in Japan. So obviously Mega Man in everywhere else. So what they did, and I believe the story is, they gave them, Capcom USA, gave their team, I believe, one day or even maybe overnight to come up with the box cover or a poster, let's say, for this game for the US. And what they came up with is this. And nowhere near close to what this game actually is. Now, this game actually didn't perform well in North America at all. And I think it actually started out slow kind of everywhere, and then word of mouth kind of carried it. But notoriously, this cover is just abysmal because the color scheme is wrong. The levels behind him are not even an indicator of the game itself. What is going on with him himself? I get it that it is Mega Man, that what they called it here, but he is technically, he's a boy. He's more of a boy kind of thing. Again, the colors aren't even right, but he's definitely more of a man, I would guess, in the U.S. cover. So that has been, and I knew it was bad, and I remember seeing it and thinking, what in God's name is this? I guess the story with it is, yeah, they gave them overnight to come up with something. I think it was created in 6 hours, and it was atrocious, and it's been kind of blasted by Capcom, and that was actually, the cover of it was blamed for how bad Mega Man did in the US. They blamed the cover for that. So that's kind of just the more behind the scenes stuff. But obviously, again, spawning so many games. And I actually played this because of the collections, right? So there's many collections of Mega Man and even X, and a lot of them are on PlayStation Plus. A lot of them actually just came to PlayStation Plus over the last few months. So I thought, hey, well, I've always wanted to talk about Mega Man. Now you can play, well, I think through maybe Mega Man 10, and then you have some of the X games as well. So you could play quite a few Mega Man games for free without even buying them if you wanted to. So I did it, and I only played Mega Man 1. We'll see how this video does. Leave a like if you do like it, but we'll see how it does, and then we could do more Mega Man games in the future, because this game's pretty good. Now, this game is extremely hard. We'll talk about that in a second, but one thing I want to focus on in terms of how it's created or crafted that I respect, and this is something I remember watching and thinking, oh, this is unique, or this is different, or this really stands out, is the fact that you have a choice, right? So the game starts and you can pick any of these worlds, which are levels, which are bosses, right? So you're facing off against all of these enemies, behind me, and the order doesn't necessarily matter, at least at first glance, right? But as you play the game, you realize, oh, certain weapons are best served against others. Some of these levels are also, in my opinion, just easier than other ones. But like the fire is actually the one that I did first, managed to get it, and then I kind of, took it from there. But this game is hard without even having to focus on which one of these levels to do first. But I thought that was a cool kind of mechanic. And then once you beat those 6 levels, you unlock the final boss, which is a very, very long stage, multiple bosses, final boss. And I'll tell you this right now, I did not get to that point. I'm not good at this game. I'm just telling you like the history of this game or what this game actually is. That's what happens for those that aren't aware of how Mega Man 1 works. But the game itself, well, I figured the game would feel a little old. That's exactly how it felt. It felt a little old. But you know what? I really appreciate it. You have to be on the nose with a lot of your movements on this game. There's platforming, and you got to nail those jumps when you have different, mechanisms that are moving and you have to time things. I don't think the game is perfect with some of it. It's better sometimes versus other times. There's some levels where, say, there's like a contraption where something will shoot out from it, and you can kind of like scooch yourself up to it without it hitting you. So like I think the hitbox is generally pretty okay in this game, but there's other times like when you're jumping, you really have to make sure this is not a game that's going to give it to you, right? If you're half on something or you're jumping and you half make it, the game's not going to give it to you. And again, like sometimes it really defines where your hitbox is, and then other times when it's more platformy, more jumping things, it doesn't as much, but I appreciate the game's difficulty. Like, this game is extremely hard. It follows a concept of, you have a couple lives, you have a health, once you start to build up your powers and stuff, you have, gauges that will run out. You have to manage these things. You have to make sure you're taking hits at certain times. There are some checkpoints. I don't know if the base game did. I would really hope so, because I have no idea how you're supposed to do these levels without checkpoints, but I needed them. And luckily I got them. The enemies, pretty darn unique. I think to the boss fights against the others here, and they're really cool. Like, they remind me, is I remember growing up, I would play Mario, actually my grandparents' house in Canada, and I would just remember like some of like the dungeons, or when you walk into the room and the doors close on both sides and you're fighting a boss, and it'll jump around and you have to manage where you're jumping and stuff. This is like that on steroids, right? So there is a bit of nostalgia where it's like, it's the same basic premise. You go through a level. Each level has its own kind of flair or own different thing to it. There'll be different obstacles to get over or get across, and there'll be different enemies that are going after you. You don't have to destroy all of them. You can kind of clear your path and just get through. Every level will have its basically gimmick, right? And then when you get to the end of it, you're trapped in a room with the boss, and unlike Mario, though, these bosses are insane. These bosses deal a lot of damage. These bosses are a lot harder to dodge. And I would say going through this game, I thought multiple times, it's one of those games where you say out loud, how was I supposed to dodge that? And that's when you know that like this is a game from like a different era that we're probably just not made for in current day. I'm not trying to be some like elitist gamer either. Like, I'm generally pretty okay at video games. I think I have my really weak spots in some genres, and I think I have my strengths. I just don't think a lot of people nowadays, including myself, I couldn't do it. I did not beat this game. I just don't think people have necessarily the patience for it anymore, but it makes you say those things out loud. How was I supposed to dodge that move? Or like literally, how am I supposed to beat this boss? And it's just, that reminds me, different era, different experience, but that makes it special, And I mentioned the box cover behind me looking good. Like, the game looks good. The game looks actually really, really good. I appreciate the art style. This is 1987, and I've said this before in terms of like art and whatnot. I'm not against like photorealism. In fact, when I got into like the PS3, and I think I turned 13 that year, and as I was in my teens, I needed the games that looked the most real. Actually, I think that's what drew me to the Uncharted franchise in the first place, was just how freaking good that game looked. And I do appreciate games that look extremely good. Alan Wake 2, Plague Tale Requiem, my 2 last game of the years, right? But I like Hi-Fi Rush. I like Kena Bridge of Spirits. I like Unfinished Swan. Games that have different art styles. And where am I going with this? Well, this game looks pretty good, from the enemies to the environments to the backdrop behind you to Mega Man himself. It all looks pretty darn good. And a game coming out in 1987, would it look this good if it wasn't that kind of art style? And I think the answer is easily no, right? Like, this is, while I actually kind of like all art styles, I understand that there's certain ones that are kind of age-proof. I think the Sly Cooper, why does Sly still look pretty darn good? And he's not going to age the same way as something, say, in Uncharted. Uncharted is maybe not going to age all that well, but a Sly Cooper, a Ratchet and Clank, these cartoony ones, right? They're going to age better just because of the art style. So Mega Man, Mario, right? Like, these games have something in common in that way. The art style is kind of timeless and time-proof, where they're not going to age as badly. Because this still looks pretty, like, this, if you look at this, it was in the 80s or in the 90s, right? Like, it gives off that vibe, but it still looks pretty fine. So I enjoyed it. I had fun playing it. I got frustrated playing it, but I felt it was time. We talk about old games, and I have my preferences, on what I grew up on, and those are going to be most of what's covered, on this channel. It has been and it will be games probably in the last 20 or so years versus 30, 35, 40 years ago. But, the Castlevanias and the Marios and the Mega Mans and all these games, they're very important. And this game did very well, at least critically, right away. People knew exactly, okay, this is a great game. It did well over time with sales. It spawned a freaking franchise of like 20 plus games, right? One that's still around to this day. Very, very much impactful, in the gaming industry. So I felt it was time to at least try it, even though I wasn't good at it. I didn't beat it. I appreciate it for what it was. Definitely difficult. Definitely, you got to get pretty tactical with it and got to take your time and not fall for, some things that you think you can do and then you end up dying and say, I shouldn't have done that. You just got to be smart with this game, and I wasn't smart enough, I got to be honest. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.